A billionaire CEO stood in the middle of her own company's lobby and offered $750,000 to anyone at all who could calm her screaming little boy. Doctors had tried. Specialists flown in from across the country had tried. A row of the most expensive child psychologists money could buy stood there helpless while a 7-year-old boy sat on that marble floor, hands over his ears, screaming as if the world itself were ending, because for him, in that moment, it was. And then the maintenance man, the man who fixes the elevators and mops the floors, the man nobody in that building knew by name, set down his toolbox and walked over. He sat down on the cold marble beside the boy. He did not touch him. He did not try to stop the screaming. He simply sat, and after a few moments, he leaned in and whispered a single word. The screaming little boy went quiet. But before I tell you what that word was, and before I tell you how a maintenance worker could do in moments what a fortune in experts could not do, let me say one thing to you. If you have ever loved someone the world calls broken and known in your bones that they are not broken at all, just speaking a language nobody around them bothered to learn, then stay with me and subscribe. Because this channel is for you and the ones you love. That is all I will ask. Now, let me tell you about my own boy, because you cannot understand that lobby without him. My name is Harlan Reed. I am a maintenance man. I keep buildings running, the heating, the plumbing, the lights, the elevators, the 1,000 small broken things that nobody notices until they fail. It is invisible work. You only know I exist when something stops working, and I have made my peace with that. Mostly because I learned long ago that being invisible is not the same as being unimportant, and that some of the most important people in any building are the ones nobody can name. I am a single father, and to tell this story right, I have to tell you about my son. Because he is the reason I could do what I did, and he is the reason I would have done it for free. My boy's name is Jamie. He is a grown man now, but he was not always. For the first long stretch of his life, Jamie was nonverbal. He was autistic, profoundly so, when he was small. He did not speak a word for many years. Even now, he speaks in his own careful, particular way. When Jamie was little, the world looked at my son and saw a problem dot. He saw a child who screamed in grocery stores, who could not be hugged on some days, who lined his toys up in rows and melted down if you moved one, who covered his ears at sounds the rest of us could not even hear. The world saw something broken that needed fixing. I want to tell you what I saw, because it is the whole key to everything. I saw my son a whole, complete, perfect person who happened to experience the world turned all the way up. Every light to bright, every sound to loud, every tag in every shirt like sandpaper, every change in routine like the ground giving way. Jamie was not broken. He was overwhelmed almost all the time by a world built for people who are not wired like him. And the screaming people called a tantrum was not him being difficult. It was him drowning, and trying to tell us he was drowning in the only language he had. It took me years to learn his language. Years. And Jamie's mother, God rest her, loved that boy with everything she had. But the weight of it, the sleepless nights, the stares, the grief for the ordinary life we had pictured, wore her down. She passed when Jamie was still a boy, and it has been me and Jamie ever since. I do not say a word against her, ever, and I will not hear anyone else do so. Loving a child the world does not know how to love is a weight that two people can barely carry together. She carried her half as long and as hard as she could. The stairs in the grocery store, the birthday parties he was not invited to, the well-meaning relatives who whispered that we were spoiling him or not disciplining him enough, the grief. And it is a grief nobody tells you about, for the ordinary life you had quietly imagined before you knew. It wears on the strongest people. So when it was just me and Jamie, I made a promise to both of them, to her memory, and to my boy, that I would learn him all the way down, no matter how long it took, so that at least one person on this earth would always understand him. That promise is the reason I know everything I know. I did not learn it in a school. I learned it by keeping a promise. And in those years of learning my son, I became fluent in something most people never even know exists. I learned to read a nonverbal child. I learned that the screaming is information. I learned that you do not fix a meltdown by adding more noise, more touching, more calm down, buddy, more bright-faced strangers crowding in. You fix it by taking away, by getting low, by getting quiet, by becoming the one safe, still predictable thing in a world that is spinning too fast. I learned that the single most powerful thing you can do for a drowning child is not to grab him, but to get in the water beside him and stop thrashing, so he can see that the water is not going to kill him after all. In other words, I learned to be a calm place. It is the only real skill I have, and I pay for it with years of my life, and I would not trade it for any diploma on any wall. I want to tell you one thing about those early years. Oh, you understand, it was not some gift I was born with. There was a night when Jamie was small and he had been screaming for what felt like forever. I had tried everything I knew back then, which was very little. I had done all the wrong things, the holding, the shushing, the pleading. Please, buddy, please. And I had only made it so much worse. Finally, I just slid down the kitchen cabinets onto the floor and gave up. I stopped trying to fix him. I stopped trying to do anything at all. I simply sat on the floor and went quiet because I was too exhausted to do anything else. And within a short while my boy crawled across the kitchen and pressed his back against my arm. Not a hug, he could not do hugs, then just his back against my arm. And he went quiet too. I sat there on that floor in the stillness of the night and I wept, because I realized I had been trying to pull him out of the water for years when all he had ever needed was for me to stop thrashing and sit down in it with him. That was the night I started learning his language. It cost me my pride to learn it, which is perhaps why it stayed with me. Every wrong thing I did first is exactly how I know the right thing now. So, the building. I do maintenance for a large corporate headquarters downtown, a gleaming glass tower, the kind of place where the lobby alone cost more than every house on my street put together. The company is run by a woman named Lydia Hart, CEO and founder, the whole empire hers. I had seen her only a handful of times over the years. The way you see the people at the top of a building like that from a distance, briefly, never spoken to. To her, I was part of the building. The thing that keeps the lights on, furniture that walks. And I want to be clear. I am not bitter about that. Not even a little. It is simply how those buildings work. There are people whose names are on the door, and people whose names are on a patch sewn to a grey shirt. And the second kind learn early not to expect the first kind to ever read the patch. I had long since stopped minding. There is a strange freedom in being invisible, actually. You get to see everything because nobody performs for the furniture. I knew which executives were kind to the cleaning staff and which ones were not. I knew whose fancy office had a flask in the bottom drawer and whose had a child's drawing taped inside a cabinet where clients could not see it. You learn a building's real heart by being the man nobody notices in it. And what I had slowly learned about Lydia Hart over time was that behind the cold reputation of the empire there was a closed door somewhere in her life that all her money could not open. What I did not know about Lydia Hart, what almost nobody knew, because she kept it fiercely private, was that she had a son, a little boy named Rory, 7 years old, and Rory was nonverbal, autistic, in a way that was almost uncannily like where my Jamie had been when he was small. I learned all of this the way I learned most things, by being invisible in the room while important people talk, as if the maintenance man is not there. I pieced it together over time that Miss Hart had a child she rarely brought to the office, that she had poured what must have been a fortune into therapies and specialists, that there was a whole private world of her life that had nothing to do with the empire, and everything to do with the little boy she was fighting for. I felt for her in a quiet way, the way you feel for someone walking a road you have already walked. But it was not my place to say anything, so I did not, and then came the day. I do not know exactly what set Rory off, but with a child like that sometimes it is something huge, and sometimes it is a flickering light, or the smell of cleaning solution, or simply too many days of holding it together. But I was up on the 3rd floor fixing a door closer when I heard it, and I knew that sound. Lord, did I know that sound. The specific pitch of a nonverbal child in full overwhelm. Not a tantrum, not a brat being difficult, but a child in genuine pain, drowning, screaming because screaming is the only word he has. I knew it in my spine before my brain caught up. I had heard it 1,000 times from my own boy. and I sat very still beside him and let him have it. This small, hard one piece, and I did not say another word, because the moment did not need any more words. It had needed exactly one, and it had gotten it. The lobby was dead silent. Half a dozen experts, a crowd of office workers, and Lydia Hart on her knees with both hands over her mouth, staring at a maintenance man sitting on the floor beside her calm son, who was quietly turning a little toy son over in his fingers as if nothing had happened at all. I stayed down there on his level. I did not get up and take a bow. I simply stayed quiet and let him be calm, because the calm was new and fragile, and it was his, not mine to interrupt. And after a while, when he was ready, when he was steady, I stood up slowly and stepped back and gave him his space. I picked up my toolbox, because I had a door closer on the 3rd floor that still needed fixing. And Lydia Hart said, "Wait." Her voice was shaking. "Please wait." She came over to me, this billionaire, in front of her whole company, and she could barely get the words out. She said, "How? How did you do that? The best people in the country could not. How did you?" And I told her the truth. I said, "I did not fix him, ma'am. There is nothing to fix. I just speak a little of his language. That is all. I have a son. He is a grown man now. When he was your boy's age, he was right where Rory is nonverbal, overwhelmed by a world that is too loud for him. I spent many years learning to hear what my son could not say. So I knew what your boy was telling you. He was telling you the whole time, with his hand on the floor. He just needed somebody to be quiet enough to listen, and Lydia Hart, CEO of an empire, looked at the maintenance man she had never once spoken to in all the time I had worked there, and she started to cry. Not the desperate crying from before, but something else, something like relief and shame and gratitude all at once. Because I think in that moment she understood that the answer she had been throwing millions at had been walking around her building in a grey uniform the whole time, and she had never seen him, because she had never needed to. She told me later, much later, when we had come to know each other a little, that the thing that broke her open on that floor was not even relief. It was a kind of terrible humility. She had spent a fortune and called in the most credentialed people in the country, and the thing that actually reached her son had come from a man whose name she had never bothered to learn, who had been in her building for a long time, who she had walked past 100 times, and she said it made her wonder, lying awake that night, how many other answers to how many other problems were standing quietly in grey uniforms all over her life, all over everyone's lives unseen, because we have decided in advance that wisdom wears a suit. She said it changed how she walked through her own company after that. She started reading the patches. She started learning names. A screaming child on a marble floor taught a billionaire to see the people she had been looking through, and she never unlearned it. And then she remembered the money, the $750,000 she had offered to the whole building in her desperation, and she said, "The reward." I meant it. It is yours. My God, it is the least. And here is where I have to tell you what I did, because it is the only part of this that I think really matters. I said no, I want to be clear about why. Because it is not about being noble. I am not a noble man. I am a maintenance man with a grown son and a tired back. I said no because of Jamie. Because many years ago, when my boy was screaming on a kitchen floor and I was learning his language one impossible day at a time, there was no one to help me, and there was certainly no one throwing me $750,000 to do it. I did it because he was my son, and you do not get paid to love your child. And the thing I did in that lobby, sitting beside Rory, was the same thing, the only thing. I loved a drowning child for a few minutes the way I had learned to love my own. And you cannot take money for that. The second you take money for sitting beside a frightened child and speaking his language, you turn the purest thing a person can do into a transaction. And I would rather have stayed poor my whole life, which I mostly have, than do that to the memory of every hour I spent on the floor with Jamie. And there was something else under it too. Something harder to say. If I had taken that money, then every parent on every kitchen floor for the rest of time could be told somewhere in the back of their mind that reaching your own child is a thing with a price tag, a service, a thing the rich can buy and the poor cannot afford.
And that is a lie, and it is a cruel one. The truth, the thing I needed that whole lobby to understand, is that what saved Rory was not expensive. It was free. It was just hard and patient and learnable and available to anyone willing to get quiet and stop thrashing. I would not, let a check turn the most democratic kind of love varies into one more thing that only money can reach. So I gave the money back. Not because I am above money, God knows I am not, but because some things have to stay free or they stop being what they are. So I told her no. I told her to keep her money. But, and this is the part I am proud of, I told her what to do with it instead. I said, Miss Hart, you do not owe me a thing, but you have more money than I will ever see, and you have a boy who is going to need a whole life of people who speak his language. So here is what you do. There are thousands of parents out there right now on kitchen floors learning their kids the hard way with no help, no money, and no hope the way I did. Build something for them. A center, a program, someplace that teaches people to hear these kids, that gives families what no one gave me. Spend your $750,000 on that, and spend 10 times that. And name it after your boy so that everywhere he goes for the rest of his life, he knows the world finally learned his language. That is worth something. Me taking a check is not. She just looked at me, and then she nodded slowly, as if something had clicked into place that would never click back out. I went back upstairs, and I fixed the door closer. Now I told you this is not a fairy tale, and it is not. But the truth is better than one. Lydia Hart did it. She did not just write a check and feel good about herself. She built the thing. In time, there was a center, a real one with her son's name on the door, that does exactly what I told her. It teaches parents and teachers and therapists how to actually hear nonverbal kids, how to stop adding and start listening, how to get in the water and be still. It is free for families who cannot pay. It has helped many children and the exhausted, frightened, lonely parents who love them. Many. Because a little boy traced a sun on a marble floor and somebody finally saw it. I went to see it once it opened. The Rory Hart Center. And I will be honest, I stood in the parking lot for a while before I could make myself go in, because I knew what it was going to do to me. Inside there were rooms designed by people who finally understood. Soft lighting you could dim. Quiet corners. Spaces with nothing in them to overwhelm a flooded little mind. And staff being taught to get low and get quiet and listen instead of fix. There was a wall near the entrance where families could put up pictures of their kids, and it was already half full of these beautiful, particular children the world had called difficult, smiling in their own ways. And underneath someone had painted the words, not broken. Just speaking a language worth learning. I had to go back out to the parking lot for a minute after I read that. Because that was the whole thing I had believed alone on a kitchen floor for many years with no one to say it back to me. And now it was painted on a wall where thousands of frightened parents would walk in and read it on the worst day of their lives and feel, maybe for the first time, that they were not crazy and their child was not broken and there was a way through. And she did one more thing, quietly, that meant more to me than any check. She came and found me a few weeks later and asked if I would help. Not as a maintenance man, but as someone who knew. She asked if I would come on my own time, paid fairly for my time like the expert I apparently am, and help train the people at that center, teach them what many years with Jamie had taught me, and that I said yes to. Because that is not getting paid to love a child. That is getting paid to teach other people how, so more children get heard. There is a world of difference. And I think you know exactly what it is. I still do maintenance. I still keep the building running, the lights and the elevators and the 1,000 invisible things. But several evenings a week now, I sit in a bright room at the Rory Hart Center, and I teach young parents and eager therapists the only thing I really know how to be a calm place. How to listen to a child who has no words. How to see the sun on the floor. I make a decent living. I will never be rich. And I turned down $750,000 on a marble floor, and I have never once regretted it.
because what I got instead was the chance to make many years of the hardest love I ever gave count for something beyond my own kitchen. There is a version of that day where I take the check, and I am comfortable, and the center never gets built, and many kids stay unheard, and I am just a man who got lucky once. And there is no version where I take the check, and also get to be the man who turned one boy's quiet moment into many other kids getting hurt. The money would have fixed my back.
It would not have fixed anything that mattered. And anyway, here is the thing I have learned that the people throwing the money around mostly have not. The love you give a child the world overlooks does not disappear when the child grows. It compounds. It goes out into the world and finds other children. Every hard hour I spent learning Jamie, I thought I was spending it only on him. Turns out I was putting it in a bank I did not know about.
And many years later, it paid out all at once on a marble floor into a little boy named Rory.
And from him into a center.
And from that center into many kids I will never meet.
That is the secret no one tells you about the hardest love.
It is never wasted. It is never only for the one. It is the most patient investment there is, and it pays the whole world back eventually.
In a currency money cannot touch. That night I drove home, and I called my Jamie,
who lives in his own apartment now with support,
working a job he loves, sorting and organizing in a warehouse because he's beautiful. Particular brain makes him better at it than anyone.
My non-verbal boy who has words now, his own careful words, hard won over many years.
And I told him about Rory and the sun and the lobby, and Jamie was quiet for a moment on the line, the way he is.
And then he said, in his careful way, "You heard him. 2 words, and I had to pull over, because that is the whole thing, is it not?"
That is everything I ever tried to do for Jamie and for that little boy on the floor and for every kid the world calls broken who is not broken at all.
You heard him? Yeah, buddy.
I heard him.
You taught me how daughters. Oh, let me ask you just one thing before you go.
A room full of brilliant, expensive experts looked at a screaming child and saw a problem to solve.
And one invisible man in a grey uniform looked at the same child and saw a little boy reaching for the sun.
Because he had spent many years learning to see. So here is what I honestly want to know from you.
Is there someone in your life the world calls difficult or broken, or too much, who you have come to understand is just speaking a language most people never bother to learn?
Tell me about them down in the comments. Tell me their name. I read every single one, and I would be honored to know. And if this story reached you, if you believe as I have come to believe with my whole heart that nobody is broken,
that some people are just waiting for one other person to learn their language, then do me that one favor.
Hit subscribe if you have not yet. Drop a like so the next person finds their way here, and leave your story in the comments. I will see you in the next one. Trust me, it is a good one.